I've prepared amazing historical photos that you haven't seen before. Don't forget to subscribe. I try to post such collections every day. 1938, Fifth Avenue. A man stands on a 17th floor hotel ledge while his sister, clipped to a safety rope, crawls out to grab his hand. Brookville, Jefferson County, 1996. The flood covered the road deep enough to hide car doors and turn driveways into channels. Just 2 feet of moving water can shove a full car, so a parked vehicle here can become a sudden hazard. Jakarta, October 1965. Armed soldiers detain a civilian during Indonesia's anti-communist crackdown after the so-called 30th of September movement. Within months, the country was reshaped by mass arrests and huge loss of life. A guard is hauling a handcuffed detainee through the Shanghai concessions in 1926, where foreign run zones could seize people on the street and hold them under their own courts. 2 German soldiers turn a battlefield fire pack into a lighter, using a short burst of flame to light a cigarette in seconds. The pack's tank had to feed fuel at steady pressure, so the same gear that could project fire also worked like a brutal portable blowtorch. Australia, 1932. Farmers faced emus in the so-called Great Emu War, and the birds proved so fast and scattered that machine gun teams could not stop them. Silver Spring, Maryland. A commuter train derailment twisted multiple cars into a black zigzag across the snow, ripping up the track like a zipper. The wild part is how steel wheels can climb the rail in a split second when a fast train hits a sudden obstacle. Mount Hood, Oregon, 1953. This Skyway tram was literally a modified 36-passenger city bus hanging from cables, complete with windows and a road-style body. Engineers turned the bus into an aerial car by adding a roof grip and wheel assemblies. This is a giant manta ray lifted like a flying carpet, a sea animal that can have a wingspan over 20 feet and was sometimes reported even larger. Unlike stingrays, it has no tail stinger, and it feeds by filtering tiny plankton through gill plates while it glides like a living kite. Abu Simbel, 1860s. Francis Frith photographed the colossal seated statues of Rameses, the second half buried in sand, before modern clearing revealed the full facades. A century later, the entire temple was cut into huge blocks. April 1942. A B-25 bomber lifts off the USS Hornet after a runway run so short it looks impossible, launching the Doolittle raid toward Japan. February 1945. United States Marines ride an amphibious tracked vehicle across rough surf toward Iwo Jima, packed shoulder to shoulder with gear and radio antennas whipping in the wind. These machines could crawl from sea to sand without stopping. 1957. Dodge. The trunk is so huge that 5 women can sit inside it like a lounge, while the owner poses as if it is normal. Those long rear overhangs were built for suitcases and spare tires. Mount Washington. Cog Railway in New Hampshire was the world's first rack and pinion mountain railroad, and its steepest grade hits about 37%, far too steep for normal train wheels. Open cars like this took tourists to the summit starting in 1869. Around 1906 at Mount Aso in Japan, a man is held by a rope while he leans over an active volcanic crater with steam rising like a warning sign. Aso is one of the world's largest calderas, and its crater can vent toxic gas without notice. Chillicothe, Ohio, 1939. Telephone linemen pose on a pole stacked with crossarms that fan out like a wooden ladder into the sky. Each crossarm could carry multiple circuits. 1922. Zach T. Wilcox poses with a beard so long it pools on the studio floor like a rope. Beards that extreme can snag and tear easily, so men who grew them often wrapped the length around an arm or stored it in a case to protect it. Stockholm, April 24, 1961. The Swedish warship Vasa is lifted from the harbor after 333 years underwater, its hull still standing because the Baltic Sea is cold and low in ship-eating worms. Philadelphia, 1910. This electric company truck is a moving streetlight ladder with a hand-cranked tower that lifts a worker high above the road to reach the new wired lamps. It is basically an early bucket truck, built when cities were switching from gas lanterns to electric lights. Krefeld, Germany, March 9, 1945. Sergeant George A. Kaufman holds the Adolf Hitler Strasse sign as his unit renames it to Roosevelt Boulevard right after the town is captured. London, around 1935. Albert Johann Kramer towers at about 7 feet, 9.5 inches beside two companions who make the height gap look unreal. He toured as Lofty the Dutch Giant, and he is remembered because he reached old age for such extreme height. Goldfield, Colorado, around 1900. Miners work the Portland mine 400 feet underground, beneath a ceiling that looks like cracked glass, because hard rock was drilled and blasted to reach thin gold veins. Bristol, March 1857. The 800-ton bark Mary Ann Peters ran aground at Roanham Ferry and sat stuck for weeks while crowds gathered on the muddy banks. Late 1960s. A girl studies the scale model of the planned World Trade Center, where the Twin Towers were designed as tube buildings that used dense perimeter columns to resist wind. Switzerland, 1967. Patroy Suisse. Jets climb in a tight loop with the Alps filling the frame, making the mountain look like part of the formation. The precision is insane because each pilot holds position by tiny throttle. Late 1940s. An engineer stands beside the giant landing tire made for the XB-36, so big it looks like a room-sized wheel. It had to spread extreme weight over soft runways, but the tire still ran so hot at speed that it became a serious design headache. 1943. Polish paratroopers roll forward on well bikes. Tiny folding motorbikes dropped in containers so troops could move fast the moment they hit the ground. The bike was so stripped down, it usually had no suspension and no gears. Banff National Park, 1950. Conrad O'Brien French calmly tips his hat to a wild bear at arm's length, turning a risky encounter into a surreal, good manners moment. January 14, 1944. A Valentine DD tank floats like a metal bathtub because its canvas screen is raised to make a temporary boat around the hull. The trick was simple, but wild. The tank moved in water using propellers, then dropped the screen. High above New York City, a blindfolded steelworker balances on a narrow girder with only a thin line for backup, turning a job site into a dare. Early skyscraper crews often relied on balance and calm nerves more than safety gear. Near the ghost town site of Siberia, California, on Route 66, the ground is carpeted with rusted food cans that mark where travelers once stopped for water and supplies. 1912. Crane crewmen ride the hanging chains like a vertical ladder high above the city with nothing but steel links under their boots. Before modern harness rules, iron men often climbed the load line itself to hook and guide heavy lifts. World War II. American women welders crouch over thick steel plate, wearing heavy hoods and dark goggles to shield their eyes from the blinding arc. Their work kept ships and tanks moving, and many learned to lay clean. New York, around 1890. Early Times Square is already plastered with posters for shows and patent medicines, basically a paper billboard canyon before neon existed. This is the blueprint of modern advertising. London, 1932. A street coffee seller carries a metal boiler on his back with mugs hanging from the straps, serving hot drinks right on the curb. This was early coffee to go, built for cold mornings before chains existed, when heat. Hawaii, 1933 to 1938. A pre-war support squad drills like soldiers in helmets and rifles, but in matching swimwear for a staged morale and publicity shot. United States, 1926. A crocodile farm worker stands on a narrow island, surrounded by dozens of huge reptiles, with a no trespassing sign like it is the real fence. Early farms fed and moved them with simple poles and barriers. 1928 to 1931. Gleb Travin wrote a bicycle solo along the borders of the Soviet Union, including stretches of the Arctic coast, carrying spare tires and gear like a one-man expedition. February 15, 1944. A B-17 flies over Monte Cassino as smoke pours from the Hilltop Abbey, turning a centuries-old landmark into a target in the middle of a brutal stalemate. The shock is that the ruins did not end the fighting. They changed the terrain into harder cover. Pennsylvania, 1889. Inside an anthracite coal breaker, vibrating screens and chutes sort coal by size, while dust and waste rock fall away. Kids called breaker boys sat on those wooden planks for 10-hour days, pulling slate by hand until machines. London, 1944. A V-1 flying weapon, nicknamed the Doodlebug, drones overhead with a harsh pulse jet buzz. The nightmare was the silence, because when the engine cut out, it was already falling. New York City, 1904. The IRT powerhouse packed giant steam turbines and generators like this to feed the first subway with electricity. The same building later powered the city's steam network. New York, 1890s. The Dakota looks like a castle rising from raw rock and dirt roads, with horse wagons working right in front of luxury walls. Its location was so far uptown that people joked it sat in the Wild West, then Central Park. Philadelphia, 1950s. Children's host, Francis X. Boyle draws and plans his Chuck Wagon Pete show inside a tiny WHYY TV studio packed with props and maps. The fun link is family. His son later became actor Peter Boyle. USS Constitution, launched in 1797, is still the oldest commissioned warship afloat. To keep her wooden hull authentic, the Navy grows replacement white oak in Indiana on a 150 to 200-year timetable. Edwardian street scene, 1912. People stare upward through smoked glass and homemade filters to watch a solar eclipse together. Before safe eclipse viewers were common, many used soot-stained plates or darkened lenses. Bass Reeves, born enslaved and later one of the first black deputy U.S. Marshals west of the Mississippi, became famous for using clever disguises to capture more than 3,000 fugitives. His hardest case was his own son. 1973. Physicist Shirley Ann Jackson stands at a chalkboard the year she became the first black woman to earn a doctorate from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She later helped shape modern telecom research. Ella Williams, born in 1865, toured as Madame Obama and was billed as the tallest woman in the world, towering over her handler in full jeweled stage dress. Tonopah, Nevada, 1903. A mining boomtown explodes into existence, with freight wagons and barrel stacks feeding the ore rush that made this desert camp rich. The wild detail is the street itself, a moving supply chain where every load meant another mine shaft. Summer 1944. A Polish ground crewman grips a parachute pack beside Avro Lancaster LL 804, Lady in the Champagne Glass, with nose art and mission tallies painted on the side. It flew more than 50 night raids and still survived the war. Chicago, October, 1871. After the Great Fire, whole blocks became ash fields with only brick chimneys and stone shells still standing. The blaze burned for about 2 days and left roughly 100,000 people homeless. New York City, 1960. A presidential candidate and his wife wave from an open car as confetti falls, and a Leadership for the 60s campaign poster sits on the hood. Before non-stop television ads, these street motorcades were the viral feed. Lampasas, Texas, 1880. A dusty main street with rail tracks, hitching posts, and a saloon sign as big as a billboard. This town boomed on mineral springs and cattle traffic, so the street is half spa resort and half cowtown supply line. 1939. A Luftwaffe soldier stands by a fresh field grave marked with a cross, while a crashed propeller lies nearby like a frozen final moment. The eerie detail is how quickly battle turns machines into memorials, with wreckage. Pearl Harbor, February 1945. Navy diver Owen F.P. Hammerberg crawled under a sunken landing ship in Westlock, jetting through mud and twisted wreckage to reach trapped teammates. Belfast, 1941. Men pick through mountains of brick after German air raids, turning city streets into raw rubble yards overnight. The Belfast Blitz hit shipyards and working neighborhoods hard. Bar Harbor, Maine, July 1925. The Navy airship Shenandoah hovers low over the water to dock with the yacht Lindonia, using ropes to steady a flying ship at sea. It looks effortless, but one gust could swing a dirigible like a giant sail. New York, 1971. Raven Chanticleer arrives at the Fraser Ali Fight of the Century dressed like a royal, turning the sidewalk into a runway. That night was not just boxing, it was a celebrity magnet where style and status. Robstown, Texas, 1939. A Mexican-American girl presses fresh masa into tortillas and cooks them on a wood stove in a one-room kitchen. Tortillas puff when steam separates the layers, so that little balloon on the griddle is the sign you nailed it. Shanghai, November 11th, 1937. 4 Japanese soldiers stand in silhouette outside the Railway Administration building, its facade punched with fresh blast scars. Dresden, February 14, 1945. The city center is a field of shattered stone, with only a few burned shells still standing along the main boulevard. The bombing created a massive firestorm that ate oxygen and left blocks looking scraped flat. Ellis Island, 1910. A family steps onto American soil carrying everything they own in boxes and bundles, with a child hauling a huge sack like a grown-up. Most arrivals were inspected in minutes, but a single chalk mark could send you to further checks. Britain in World War I, the tank Egbert rolls into town for Tank Week, a fundraising tour that brought the new war machines right to civilians. People paid to see and climb them, and the show helped sell war bonds by making steel feel personal. Frankfurt, 1947. A chimney sweep poses with his brush and soot kit on a bicycle, a vital job when homes ran on coal and wood heat. In German tradition, chimney sweeps are seen as symbols of good luck. Babi Yar, near Kyiv. People gather at the ravine where, on September 29th, more than 33,000 Jewish residents were killed in a 2-day massacre. The memorials here matter because this site became a symbol of the shooting genocide. A German U-boat tows the Fa-330 Boxstelze rotor kite, lifting an observer about 100 meters to see far beyond the flat horizon. The dark twist is the crash dive drill. The cable is cut, the rotor is dumped, and the pilot drops by parachute to wait alone in the sea. Brittany, early 1900s. A milk seller balances 2 heavy clay pots on a headboard, turning her body into the delivery cart. The pots were porous and stayed cool by slow evaporation, a simple refrigerator for milk before electric fridges. Kwajalein, February 2nd, 1944. Freed Korean laborers crouch over a map with United States troops, pointing out Japanese positions from memory. The sharp detail is how survival knowledge became intelligence. The P-47 Thunderbolt was a heavyweight fighter, so big it could haul rockets and bombs and still dive like a brick without breaking apart. Its 2,000 horsepower radial engine made it a fast hit-and-run machine, deadly in ground attack. Near Kalak, November 1942, a long column of Romanian prisoners trudged through snow after the Soviet offensive cut through their lines on the Don. The chilling scale is the capture of about 30,000 men in this sector. 1949. During a polio quarantine, a mother lies on the ground to read to her 6-year-old through a basement window, close enough to share a story, but not a breath. In that era, there was no polio vaccine yet. Occupied France, 1944. A Republic P-47. Thunderbolt dives on a tall French water tower, and the Flak Tower caption was likely just a bad guess. The eerie part is how war turns a town's water supply into a target. May 1941. The few Bismarck survivors stand captured in England after the battleship went down, leaving only about 115 men alive from more than 2,000. One of the biggest killers was the cold Atlantic itself. February 17, 1945, during Operation Veritable, this street near Gok sat on the path of 3 British divisions pushing through the flooded Reichswald toward the Rhine. The before and after is the shock. A bare, broken road in 1945 becomes a quiet, modern neighborhood. Endurance is trapped and crushed by Antarctic ice in the Weddell Sea in 1915, moments before it sinks. Shackleton saves every crew member, and the wreck is found in 2022 in deep water, preserved like a time capsule. Disassembled Martin B-26. Marauder aircraft are strapped on a cargo ship deck in early 1942, heading in a convoy to Hawaii for fast assembly. This is how the United States moved full aircraft across the ocean quickly when runways and hangar space were limited on islands. In 1941, a Finnish soldier shows a captured Soviet soldier a strange upgrade on a vehicle. Soviet gas masks turned into headlight covers. It is a sharp snapshot of Frontline recycling, where scarce gear was remade into anything useful in seconds. Swedish engineer Salomon August André's hydrogen balloon. The Eagle lies collapsed on Arctic pack ice in 1897 after only 65 hours in the air, leaving the crew stranded with the wind deciding everything. A giant Cornish pumping engine installed in Tombstone, Arizona in 1883 was built to fight rising mine water, with a flywheel taller than a person. After a 1886 fire and huge replacement cost, the pump stopped, water won, and Tombstone's first silver boom collapsed. A Pennsylvania Railroad steam locomotive plows into the stopped eastbound Mercantile Express at Mount Union Station in Huntingdon County on February 28, 1917, piling cars into a jagged wall of wreckage. The impact shattered one extended family. A Minnesota farmer in 1916 lifts a woman onto his shoulders to prove how tall his corn crop grew, turning the field into a living measuring stick. This was before modern hybrid corn became common, so a towering stand like this meant perfect weather, rich soil. In an early 1900s St. Louis hospital, a surgeon painted story scenes all over the operating room walls. He did it so patients would stare at the pictures while anesthesia started working, instead of focusing on fear. In 1885, Philadelphia, Anandibai Joshi from India, K. Okami from Japan, and Sabat Islambuli from Syria finished medical training, standing together like a global first. At a time when many schools blocked women, this 1918 public notice from Kelowna, British Columbia orders schools, churches, theaters, and pool rooms closed to slow the Spanish influenza. It even bans gatherings of 10 or more. This secrecy billboard outside Oak Ridge, Tennessee, warns workers, "What you see, do, and hear here must stay here," guarding a town built for the Manhattan Project. It used simple shame and fear of loose talk to protect one of the biggest science and factory efforts in history. An aerial view shows Iwo Jima with Mount Suribachi as a thick smoke cloud rolls over the island during the 1945 landing. That small volcanic cone became a key landmark for pilots and troops. A group of Hollywood stars toured during the Second World War, piling into a military vehicle beside an armed police soldier for a quick photo. These tours turned fame into morale, with performers flying long routes to stage shows. In 1922, Howard Carter's team opens Tutankhamun's sealed tomb and photographs tall guardian statues standing like silent sentries in the doorway. Many rooms were still packed and untouched after more than 3,000 years. In 1912, a fisherman sits by a wooden house, patiently mending a net knot by knot with a simple needle tool. One weak knot could rip open in seconds and erase a full day's catch, so this quiet repair was survival work. In 1923 Alabama, this Booker T. Washington Agricultural School on Wheels was a traveling classroom that drove straight to rural families. Inside the truck were tools and lesson kits that taught better crops safer food handling, and home skills on the spot. In 1954, Bolshoi legends Galina Ulanova, age 44, and Maya Plisetskaya, age 29, are caught midair in Asaf Messerer's class, frozen at the peak of a leap. The shot shows how ballet power is built in rehearsal. In East Beirut in 1978, a Christian militiaman poses with a large cross on his chest and a long rifle at his side, mixing faith symbols with street readiness during Lebanon's conflict. In 1950, Bremen, a shashlik kebab stand, serves hot skewers in a street still scarred by bomb damage, with smiling chefs under cartoon cook signs. In 1912, at Hibiya Park in Tokyo, two women in kimono ride in an early motorcar, blending old style with brand new speed. Japan's car era was so new that a drive like this was a public spectacle, like watching the future roll past. This is dancer Isadora Duncan, who helped invent modern dance by rejecting strict ballet steps and performing with free, flowing movement. In 1927, her long scarf caught in the wheel of an open car and ended her life in seconds. Queens, New York. In 1967 is buried under deep snow, swallowing parked cars up to the windows and turning a normal street into white walls. Storms like this can erase roads in hours, and the trapped cars show how cities can feel helpless when snow drifts harden like concrete. A 20-year-old Stanley Kubrick sits with his camera in 1948 at Look magazine, still more photographer than filmmaker. That habit of framing reality became his signature, and many of his later movie shots feel like frozen magazine photos brought to life. In September 1954 in Quincy, Massachusetts, Mrs. Weldon Erickson cooks outdoors for family and neighbors after Hurricane Carol knocked out normal kitchens. One backyard fire turned into a shared lifeline, showing how fast a street becomes a small village when power. Austro-Hungarian troops wait above Lake Garda with a heavy machine gun aimed down a mountain approach, turning the ridge into a locked gate. In July 1943 at Fairmount Park in Philadelphia, a tennis player snaps into a serve while Jack Delano records everyday life during the Second World War. Delano worked for the United States government photo units to show the home front. South African air crew stand beside the torn tail of their C-47 after their aircraft was struck during a flight in August 1986. The shredded metal shows how one hit can nearly break a transport plane, yet the crew is here because they made it out alive. In 1933 in Lwów, families press close to Zalewski Confectionary's display window, staring at cakes and sweets like they are museum pieces. The glass turns desire into a public show, hinting how a simple treat could feel rare, expensive, or worth waiting for. In Tehran on November 28, 1978, Iranian students flood the street chanting against the Shah, their raised fists turning a normal intersection into a turning point. Only 49 days later, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi left Iran by plane. In January 1966 in Vietnam, a Marine moves through a gully packed with hidden sharpened stakes, stepping like the ground itself is a trap. These stake fields were meant to slow patrols to a crawl and force constant caution, turning distance into exhaustion. In 1946, Vietnam's Supreme Court is sworn in, with rows of robed officials facing the room like a brand new system being assembled in public. It captures a country trying to turn revolution into rules, using courts to claim authority beyond the battlefield. A United States Marine pauses on Peleliu in September 1944, helmet low and eyes scanning, caught in a rare close-up from the front line. Peleliu became a brutal fight of heat and rock ridges, where small hills were turned into fortresses. In Warsaw in November 1918, Polish guards with rifles watch over disarmed German soldiers as the old order collapses. It is the instant power flips in the street, with a newly reborn Poland taking control after more than 100 years without its own state. In 1935, Harlem, posters reading "Ethiopian volunteers register here" show Black Americans trying to enlist to defend Ethiopia during the Italian invasion. Thousands signed up, but the United States government blocked most from traveling. In Miami in January 1976, Marianne Staubach cheers in the stands at Super Bowl X, waving a Dallas Cowboys pennant as the crowd surges around her. On February 17, 1913, cars line up outside the 69th Regiment Armory in New York for the Armory Show, America's first huge modern art exhibition. It shocked many visitors with radical new styles. This photo shows Huey P. Newton in jail, and on August 5, 1970, he was cleared in court and released after a high-profile case. Years later, he earned a doctorate in social philosophy at the University of California, Santa Cruz. In 1918, at Essy, France, Lieutenant Colonel R.D. Garrett tests a German field telephone left behind after the Saint-Mihiel retreat, using it to pull instant intel from enemy wiring. In trench war, a captured phone line could reveal positions and orders within minutes. In 1910, at the Bridgeport Hill Climb in Connecticut, a driver sits in an open race car with goggles ready, built to charge straight up Sport Hill at full throttle. These early hill climbs were brutal tests of engine power and nerve before guardrails. On March 4, 1964, the Dave Clark 5 jump in Central Park, just days before their first appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. Their timing hit the peak of the British invasion, when one television spot could launch a band across the entire United States. In 1960, New York City, Steve McQueen and Neil Adams sit in a Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Roadster, a car famous for its lightweight body and race-bred engineering. Only a small number of these roadsters were built. Inside New York's Armory Show in 1913, modern paintings and bold sculptures fill the vast military hall like a new visual language invading an old space. Many visitors walked in expecting classic art and walked out stunned. In Norway in 1915, two guards face each other in a changing of the guard beside snow-buried cannons silhouetted against a pale winter sun. USS Newton was a First World War-era wooden ship, the last surviving Emergency Fleet Corporation, design 1001, still afloat. It served as a training ship around Jersey City, was redesignated 933 in 1941, then sank in the Hudson River in January 1946. An Austro-Hungarian Skoda 7.5-centimeter mountain gun sits on deep snow in the First World War, its small wheels and broken shelter showing how hard artillery life was in the Alps. This gun was built to be taken apart and hauled by mules. Racing officials pose on a wooden stand at the 1908 Ormond Daytona races in Florida, when cars competed flat out on hard-packed beach sand. Before paved tracks were common, the shoreline was the speedway, and timing a run depended on flags, stopwatches. In 1915, officers dine in the mess of the Great Lakes freighter SS Quincy A. Shaw, with the captain in front raising a glass to the camera. Captain Millard Mitchell Stewart commanded this ship across multiple seasons, guiding cargo through fog, storms. In 1944, Riga, civilians hold flowers under a banner that reads, "Long live the heroic Latvian riflemen," as Soviet troops enter the city. The Latvian riflemen were a famous unit with roots in the First World War and Revolution. In late September 1944, on Freedom Square in Tallinn, residents crowd around Soviet soldiers while self-propelled guns roll past, including Su-85 and Su-76 vehicles. Those armored guns were built to support infantry in city fights. In Belfast in 1909, Titanic's giant hull rises inside Harland and Wolff scaffolding, so huge it looks like a building under construction. The shipyard recorded 8 worker deaths and 246 injuries while building her. This 1929 family portrait is linked to a Christmas Day tragedy in North Carolina, when Charles Lawson's wife and 6 children died, and he also died soon after. The oldest son, Arthur, lived because he was out on an errand. In the 1920s in Elbląg, a giant dairy plant runs an early bottling line, pushing milk bottles past machines like a factory for breakfast. The whole complex was demolished in 2014, so this busy production floor is now a quiet residential block. In February 1926, at the Westminster Kennel Club show in New York, a champion black and tan dog named Peter is posed behind a large camera like he is the photographer. The joke works because the camera is almost his size. In Eastport, Maine in 1876, workers packed sardines for some of the first American canning runs, turning a fast-spoiling fish into shelf-safe food. Canning let sardines travel inland by rail and ship, creating a mass market that reshaped coastal jobs and diets. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain holds up the Munich Agreement in 1938, promising peace for our time after giving up the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. If Germany had truly stopped there, a 1939 war might have been delayed. A scene from The Day the Earth Stood Still shows Klaatu on the ground as soldiers and tanks surround him like he is a threat instead of a visitor. The film became a science fiction classic by using an alien arrival to mirror Cold War fear. On February 16, 1926, New York Congressman John Boylan points at a messy eyesore along Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, with the Capitol rising in the distance. On a New York street in 1954, cameras roll as Marilyn Monroe and Tom Ewell step out of a theater showing The Creature from the Black Lagoon, setting up a scene for The 7-Year Itch. In Tehran in 1979, a woman walks calmly in front of armed soldiers, turning an ordinary street into a high-stakes stage. Photos like this show how public protest forced power to react in real time, and how one unarmed figure could shift the mood of an entire crowd. In 1968 at Cleveland Municipal Stadium, Bob Hayes, coach Tom Landry, and quarterback Don Meredith huddle by a giant heater before an NFL playoff game. Hayes was an Olympic 100-meter champion. In 1954, Roger Bannister breaks the 4-minute mile, crossing the line as the stopwatch proves a barrier just fell. The impossible record dropped to 3 minutes 59.4 seconds, and soon other runners matched it once the mental wall was gone. In 1943, poet Alexander Tvardovsky stands in Zagorje in the Smolensk region beside the charred remains of his home, holding his hat like he has nowhere to put it. He later wrote the famous wartime poem Vasily Tyorkin. Louisa Kerwin Thiers, Wisconsin's oldest woman, died in Milwaukee on February 17, 1926, at age 111. She said her long life came from sensible habits, and she was proud of being a descendant of a Revolutionary War veteran. In 1960, at Sutton Park in Birmingham, children drift in small paddle boats while a boy watches from the stone edge like a referee. Sutton Park is one of Europe's largest urban parks. In 1964, Paris, the Beatles crowd around French actress Sophie Hardy, while Dizzo Hoffman catches the moment like a backstage secret on the street. This was peak Beatlemania, when a single candid photo could travel the world faster than their tour bus. On November 6, 1955, at Semipalatinsk, the Soviet RDS-27 test throws a huge fire cloud into the sky from a 1,000-meter burst. It was a weaponized Sloika-style design, but it was quickly eclipsed weeks later by the two-stage RDS-37. In August 1944 in Poland, a Soviet unit drives a captured German Panther tank east of Warsaw, with fresh markings painted over the old ones. Captured machines were a risky shortcut because crews had to learn a new layout fast. A uniformed man wears an oversized steel chest plate with wide side wings, shaped to make incoming shots glance away instead of hitting flat on. It looks like early 20th century experimental body armor, heavy enough to limit movement. At the 1955 Indianapolis 500, the pace car peels off and the field explodes into a sprint as drivers fight for clean air into the first turns. The Indy 500 is one of the world's oldest major races, and its rolling start turns one signal into instant chaos at nearly full speed. In 1926, a Romany family poses at the door of a wagon home with two girls on the steps and one calmly holding a small fox. The mix of lace curtains, a pet cage, and a wild animal in a child's lap shows how mobile life could still be carefully organized. A black and white portrait shows a calm man in a wide cavalry-style hat with crossed sabers, wearing a patched military jacket and a wristwatch, standing beside an aircraft. In 1928, Belgian finance titan Alfred Lowenstein vanished mid-flight from his private plane on the route to Brussels. Weeks later, he was found near Boulogne, and a leading theory says he opened the wrong rear door after the tiny restroom. Lillian Gish, starring as Hester Prynne in The Scarlet Letter, 1926, stands on the town scaffold while a Puritan crowd surrounds her with pikes in a staged public shaming scene. The shot is from director Victor Sjöström's silent-era classic. Katrin Safety Experiment, October 24, 1958. A 21-ton tower setup at the Nevada test site creates a towering dark plume over the desert. A young woman leans on a large wooden radio, the kind of living room set that carried voices across entire countries in the 1940s. February 17, 1934. State College, Pennsylvania, is often cited as the first place to teach driving in a high school, turning a new dangerous machine into a graded school subject. Before this, most teens learned by trial on back roads. London, 1877. This doorway was a rare second-chance lodging house for released prisoners, run by a former police officer who knew exactly who was coming in. La Boisselle, September 1916. This night photo turns the battlefield into a strange sky of white arcs, made by long exposure capturing flares and tracer-like fire as they curved above the ground. It is a rare view of how night fighting looked in the Somme area. Brewster F-2A1. Buffalo around 1941, the United States Navy's first carrier-based monoplane fighter. Within a year, it was widely seen as outclassed, so this calm photo hides a plane that many pilots called a dangerous mismatch. In 1965, Ford made the in-car 8-track a dealer option, letting drivers control their own music instead of whatever the radio chose. About $130 bought this box and a stack of cartridges. Paradise Park near Silver Springs, Florida, in the 1950s. The sign openly advertises a separate tourist attraction for colored people, showing how travel itself was split by law and custom. This is the blood-stained uniform coat, linked to Archduke Franz Ferdinand, shot in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. That single attack set off a chain of alliances and ultimatums that escalated into World War I. Early 1900s. Texas, the El Progreso newspaper crew stands inside a cramped print shop where ink, hot metal type, and heavy presses turned local rumors into tomorrow's truth. Small papers like this could shape elections and community life fast. Canadian soldiers crowd a French beach on June 6, 1944 at Juneau, while barrage balloons float overhead to confuse low-flying attackers. This single landing helped open a new front in Europe. Late August 1937, near Santander, a soldier stands beside a captured Renault FT-17, a World War I tank still used in the Spanish Civil War. The shock is how outdated it was even then, yet it kept returning to battle because it was easy to repair. 30 August 1940, a Heinkel He-111 bomber sits in an English field after an emergency landing. Its bent prop and glass nose make it look alive but trapped. A Battle of Britain raid stopped by bad luck. Often captioned as a famous British wartime leader on his 90th birthday, November 30th, 1964, leaning out a window with his wife smiling behind him. The startling detail is the date. It was near the end of his life. April 1945, on the Elbe River in Germany. Soviet Cossack cavalrymen meet American officers, a rare face-to-face moment as the front lines finally lock together. Horses, medals, and jeeps share the same road. Soviet Cossacks move a PTRD 1941 anti-tank rifle on horseback because the 14.5mm gun was too heavy for fast foot travel. 1945, on the training carrier USS Wolverine, a TBF Avenger nose, plants into the deck after a bad landing, with the prop digging grooves like a drill. The pilot climbs out while deck crew are already staged to patch the damage. Assault on Danzig, a Soviet 203mm B-4 howitzer, nicknamed Stalin's Sledgehammer, is hauled into the ruins for point-blank demolition fire. These guns could smash bunkers and concrete with huge shells. Chernobyl, 1986. Workers line up in protective gear before a short sprint onto Reactor 4's roof to push debris away by hand because robots failed in the intense radiation. Each run lasted only seconds, and the clock, not courage. Battle of Berlin, a 203mm B-4 howitzer fires down a city street, using siege gunpowder at almost direct range. Each shell hit like a demolition charge, made to break fortified buildings and open a path through rubble. London, January 19, 1967. Cybermen from Doctor Who stand in full costume at a bus stop, looking like robots trapped in ordinary rush hour. A German high command meeting in 1944. Officers crowd around a map while their leader points at the front lines. This year is linked to the famous briefcase plot, so this ordinary planning scene feels like a frame taken just before everything changed. Often captioned as Hans Rudolf Giger in 1979, wearing sunglasses he built from oversized safety pins so the hardware becomes part of the face. He later shaped the biomechanical look that defined modern science fiction horror. Kabul, 1984. A young Afghan revolutionary wears traditional jewelry and dress while gripping a rifle, a sharp clash of heritage and modern conflict in one frame. Airspeed AS-4 Ferry, first flown in 1932, built for Sir Alan Cobham's National Air Day shows to carry crowds on short thrill flights. Only 4 were made, and 2 briefly ended up with the Royal Air Force at the start of the Second World War. In the 1920s, radium girls painted glowing watch dials and were taught to point brushes with their lips, unknowingly swallowing tiny amounts of radium each shift. Their lawsuits forced new workplace safety rules. February 18, 1926. A proposed Alimony Boulevard view shows empty hills cut by a dirt track before the road reshaped this corner of San Francisco. February 18, 1900. British troops at Paardeberg charged a dug-in position and took their worst one-day losses of the Second Boer War, later called Bloody Sunday. The brutal lesson was modern rifles. The Soviet submarine K-56 glides into Helsinki, its deck crew standing exposed above a machine built to hide underwater. The tension is that every arrival made the sub briefly visible and vulnerable, turning a secret weapon into a public silhouette. February 18, 1926. Tampa Downs in Oldsmar, Florida opened its first day, and this sea of parked cars shows how fast racing became a mass road trip event. Built by Matt J. Wynn. Around 1950, actor Clark Gable poses on a new Harley-Davidson, a yearly gift from Indianapolis Motor Speedway owner Tony Holman because Gable refused paid appearances. February 18, 1930. Elm Farm. Ollie became the first cow to fly in a Ford Tremotor. She was milked mid-air, and the milk was dropped by tiny parachutes to a cheering crowd below. Jacksonville, Florida, September 11, 1964. The Beatles rush out of the George Washington Hotel under heavy police pressure. They held a press event there, but reportedly refused to stay after learning the hotel was whites only. Sweden, 1880s. 3 girls posed by the Herstaberg runestone Ug 46, carved centuries earlier with the line, "Vibern raised this stone in memory of Solva, his brother." Los Angeles, 1952. Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall with their Jaguar XK 120, a model that could reach about 120 miles per hour and help define the post-war sports car craze. Castle Romeo, March 27, 1954, at Bikini Atoll. A test fireball blooms just before sunrise, turning the horizon red. It is often listed at about 11 megatons, making it one of the biggest United States tests ever filmed. Chicago, 1941. A pin setter crouches in the pit, resetting bowling pins by hand inside the narrow machinery lane. Before automatic pin setters spread in the 1950s, this was a real job with fast timing and real risk from flying balls and falling pins. Stockholm, Sweden, 1913. Two demolition workers pose in rubble as the Hästen district and the Sveasallen are torn down, with old wallpaper still clinging to the broken wall behind them. New Forest, England, January 1949. A Romany family cooks by a fire beside wagons and a canvas shelter at the Shave Green Camp. 1945. An American photographer and model sits in the private bathtub of Germany's fallen leader, turning a symbol of power into a blunt trophy photo. The muddy boots on the bath mat are the real punchline. Germany, around July 1945. A refugee pedals past an Avis motorway sign toward Berlin with everything he owns tied to the bicycle. Avis was built as a high-speed test track, but here it becomes an escape road where survival moves at bicycle speed. Belgium, 1880. Milk is delivered by a dog-drawn cart, with big jugs riding behind a team harnessed like miniature horses. It was cheap urban transport before trucks, and these dogs could pull heavy loads all day on narrow streets. Mississauga, Ontario, May 26, 1942. A small arms limited worker holds a Sten Mark II made at the Long Branch plant. The Sten was designed for speed and cost. Amritsar, India, 1899. The huge Nagra drum at the Golden Temple sits on a wheeled frame as musicians strike it with long sticks. A drum this size was built to throw sound across the complex, turning rhythm into a public signal you could feel in your chest. Elephanta Caves near Mumbai, built around the 5th century. A vast rock-cut hall leads to a colossal Shiva relief carved straight from the island's basalt. The scale is the shock because the statue is not placed there at all. It is the mountain itself turned into art. A female police officer checks a woman's bathing suit on a beach in the 1920s, measuring whether it met local decency rules. In some cities, women were fined or arrested for swimsuits judged too short. United States, 1944. Rows of brand-new F-4U Corsairs and F-6F Hellcats are packed wingtip to wingtip inside a giant hangar before shipment to the Pacific. The jaw-drop fact is the scale of production. These fighters were built in the tens of thousands. I will be very grateful for your subscription to the channel. Every day I try to tell you about such interesting historical photos.